a September night in 2004, a domestic violence call came into Brooklyn's 67th precinct. Detectives Robert Parker and Patrick Rafferty responded. It was a routine job, until it wasn't. The suspect, 28 years old, wrestled away Detective Parker's service weapon and opened fire. Both detectives were shot and killed. For Teresa Leto, a retired NYPD First-Grade Homicide Detective, this wasn't just any case. These were her partners, her friends, and it would become the most personal and harrowing case of her remarkable career. Teresa joins us now here on Heat NYC, True Stories of Crime and Fire. Thank you so much for making some time for us.
Thank you.
You know, I'm going through this case here, and this was maybe the most difficult case of your career.
True.
But your history in law enforcement really goes back to when you were a teenager.
Basically.
You said you feel like you spent most of your adult life at some point in law enforcement?
Yeah, I was. I started working with the Criminal Justice Agency when I was 18 years old, back in the early 70s, 1975, and I started working, interviewing defendants to see if they'd be released on their own recognizance. And I got that job because I was going to college and I needed to. It was free tuition was over, and I was trying to get a job.
I mean, you're a New York, you're a city girl. I grew up in Queens and Brooklyn. I mean, is that right? I mean,
I grew up right on the border in Ridgewood, and then I lived most of my life in downtown Brooklyn. After that, so I'm a Brooklyn girl. I'm proud of that.
At some point within the Brooklyn DA's office, you start to work undercover.
Well, then I joined the police department, and then I worked in Midtown Manhattan for a period. And then the Brooklyn DA's office called and asked me if I wanted to go back because they were looking for younger detectives, because most of the detectives there were older, to do undercover work, to do surveillances and undercover work. And I thought, that sounds like fun.
At what point did it look like this was going to be for some kind of organized crime operation?
Well, they were doing these cases, and they were all traditional Italian organized crime cases.
Like what are the families at this point? Is it a Genovese family?
We did Lucchese's and Gambinos.
Lucchese's and Gambino family.
And they would send me out to do surveillances. They would wire me up and send me into clubs to do overhears and talk to people and set up drug buys. So at this point, I really didn't know anything about drugs. So I was going in and I was buying cocaine from associates, the Lucchese crime family. And those low associates and the associates then were arrested, and they led to major investigations. So one of them is Anthony Queso, who was involved in this bypass gang. And it was a big burglary ring that would hit different locations in the city, that like banks and watch companies, and they would bypass the alarms on holiday weekends.
Wow.
And then they would, how we got his name was with a acetylene torch, but put a hole in the roof, go down.
Gas pipe was his nickname.
Yes.
So he would use a torch?
Acetylene torch. And they would cut a hole in the roof and go down, and they would steal. So they hit Boulevard Watch Company in Queens. They hit grocery stores and banks and safety deposit boxes. And we followed them around, and we made narcotic buys, and it led to his arrest.
And you said in that particular case you were part of the trial, or you went to the trial, or you had to testify, and somebody did something when you were during...
It was funny because they hit a Boulevard Watch Company, and they stole all these watches. And during the trial, I was testifying, and one of the defendants actually raised his wrist and showed his watch, and all the detectives were like, so
what a way to let them know what's going on.
Yeah.
Not the smartest move necessarily if you're a defendant, but
I guess he was bragging.
Those cases, as you mentioned, I mean, we talk about Bypass Gang and Gas Pipe Casso and Tommy Karate Pietra, or one of the other names. Yeah. The names of the Mafia figures are always so interesting. But some of those cases that you built put people away.
Yes, they put away for a long time.
You also worked cases with the Jamaican crime syndicate.
I was assigned to the 6-7 detective squad, which is...
So you're back at the end. I guess you never left the NYPD at that point. You were just doing work for the... This isn't the FBI. You were doing work for the Brooklyn DA as an NYPD officer.
Okay. Right. We solicited help. nobody could do a case by themselves, especially the magnitude of these cases. So when we did all those cases with organized crime, you needed the FBI. You just needed them, and they needed us, and it was a good partnership. And
one thing I wanted to ask you before going to the Jamaican gangs or crime organizations, you always hear that the mob said to their people not to get involved in drugs. Don't sell drugs. It's gonna, because it's gonna. But did you find that was the case, or were they just kind of had their hands in everything?
They should have listened to that, but they did have their hand in a lot of drugs, and that's what led to the demise. Because between selling it and using it is what caused them to cooperate with the police.
Took a lot of them out.
Well, they should have listened to not getting involved in drugs, but there's a lot of money in it, so there's greed, and that's why they violated their own code. There's
many cases that you've investigated over the course of your career. Is there an unsolved case that sort of still stays with you, that sticks with you? I mean, or anything along those lines?
Yeah, there is. I had a case in the early 2000s where a correction officer was killed while he was working on his motorcycle in his mother's house in his garage. And it was 2:00 in the morning, and there was another guy with him, and they were working on a motorcycle. And 3 guys came up to steal the motorcycle, and they ended up shooting him and killing him. And the mother, it was really sad. She lost her other son on a robbery. He was helping a friend close a bodega in Brooklyn, and somebody came in to rob the store, and he killed his son. So it's her second son that she was killed. And it really broke my heart. The woman was so sweet, and it was really a terrible thing that she was going through. And everybody loved the deceased. He was a great guy. He was really into motorcycles. He had like a fancy motorcycle. I knew nothing about motorcycles at that point.
Right.
But there was a group that was stealing these motorcycles.
Oh.
And we had no witnesses. And the guy that was with him was complete shock. He just, it was really hard for him to identify anybody. It was just hard for him to even put it together. He was in shock. And it was 2:30 in the morning. So people said, well, it was on a main thoroughfare in East Flatbush. And people said, I think I heard something, but it could be a backfire of a truck.
Okay.
Nobody really heard. It was one shot. So I had the bright idea then to see with cell sites. They said, there's nobody around. There's not that many people. It's 2:30 in the morning. To triangulate the cell sites to see who used their phone. And that's how we found the defendant. So we tracked him down. We found the group. We couldn't get an ID from the witness that was there because he was so traumatized. When he looked at the lineup, he said, I'm like 80% sure, and the DA wouldn't go for that. We had cell site information, but they still wouldn't. The DA's office wouldn't go for it. So it plagued me. So we have these wanted cards, like their identification cards on people. So everybody in his group, this motorcycle group, I had these wanted cards on. So every time they would get picked up for like minor crimes, I would get notified, and I would go and I would talk to them, annoy them. So at one point, I think I was doing that too much and kept on going to the defendant's house to try to get some information. That he left. He left and he went down to the Carolinas. And he pulled the same thing in Carolinas.
Wow.
Only this time, he went to steal a motorcycle, but a police officer was going into a parking garage at the same time that he was stealing the motorcycle, and ended up in a huge chase. They chased him through like 3 different counties. There was helicopters, different jurisdictions.
Where is this down in Carolina? Charlotte, Raleigh area?
It was the Raleigh area of Carolina. They chased him all into a wooded area. He turned around and he pulled a gun on the police officers, and they opened fire.
Wow.
So I went down there to talk to the deceased, the defendant's girlfriends that was down there, to try to get some information, like, did he make a statement to you? Something that we could have...
Some kind of closure.
Yeah, some closure for the mother. And she said, oh, he did something in New York, and he killed a correction officer in New York. So we were able to get some closure, but at this point he's dead. And I went back to the mother and said, look, I'm sorry, but this is, but And she was like, that's not good enough. I really wanted him to go to trial.
Wow.
And it just always bothered me that we couldn't make the arrest on him. And of course, I went back to his friends and said, you killed your friend, because if you would have cooperated, you would be in jail and be alive and you wouldn't be dead right now. They didn't like me too much for that.
As we talk here, you have this sort of soft-spoken nature, but it sounds like you can, if you have to put your foot down, I mean, you have to be you have to be that way if you're...
I'm Sicilian, so I have a hot temper.
When you think of homicide detective or a cop, cliche, you usually think of a guy. You usually think of like this sort of, the curmudgeon guy who's out there. He's beating the beaten path. But I mean, as a woman, did you find that things were, I don't know, did people treat you differently, or like what was it harder to come up through the ranks along those lines?
Well, I always say, like, I can't take credit for any of it because those women that came before me, that they really broke the glass ceiling. And because of them, it gave me the opportunity where I am today. I mean, what they went through, and you figure 1975 is when they sued to stop having police women and police men, and there was police officers. So that's not that far in the past. But yeah, it was different. But those women are the ones that paved the path for me to succeed. So I really owe it to all those women that came before me to give me the opportunity to do it. It was hard. It was different. Everywhere I went, you had to kind of prove yourself, even though you had it more experience than other people, but you did have to prove yourself. But I kind of knew that going in.
Interesting.
But I also thought that being a woman gave you sometimes gave you the upper hand, because you could go in and get a rapport with somebody. You're more soft-spoken. People were more comfortable with you talking to you. So sometimes it was easy to get confessions from people.
This wealth of experience, learning your craft here, perfecting it there, and then this night in, I guess it's not the summer, but this night in September comes, 2004. These two detectives who are responding, Detectives Parker and Rafferty, who are responding to what seems like a routine domestic violence or some kind of family situation. What happened that night?
Well, it's sad. It was the day before September 11th, the second anniversary of the World Trade Center. So this was September 10th, 2004. Bobby Parker was in the 6-7 precinct for many, many years. He was bigger than life. He was this big guy. He was 6'4", 300 pounds. He sang opera. Wow. He used to be a professional wrestler before he came on the job. He was just like bigger than life. Everybody in the precinct knew him. The civilians in the street knew him. Everybody loved him. And Detective Rafferty was just like the salt of the earth. He was like the greatest guy. Grew up in Long Island, was just a sweet guy, had a wonderful family, still has a wonderful family. And what happened was the defendant's mother knew Detective Parker. And
interesting.
And went to him in the past because she was a healthcare worker. And her son did jail time. And she actually had him violated once before, and he was on parole for using her car. So she was a healthcare worker and needed her car for the weekends to go to different people's homes. She was a home healthcare worker. So that day, September 10th earlier, she comes to the precinct looking for Detective Parker because her son was threatening to take the car for the weekend. He had a girlfriend that lived on the other side of Brooklyn. Like, he could have taken the subway or a bus or a cab. But he wanted her car, and she needed the car for work. So she came to the precinct looking for Detective Parker, and he was out on another assignment. So when he got back, they told him that Mr. Legio came and, the incident with his son in the car. So he went to her house and spoke to her, and the defendant wasn't there, but he was in the basement, and we didn't know it. He didn't know it at the time. And the mother was telling Detective Parker and Detective Rafferty that she was going to call his parole officer. And I'm sure, I wasn't there that day, the house, but I'm sure Bobby told her, like, we'll handle it. We'll talk to him. We'll calm this down. And she said, well, he went up to the avenue. So Detective Parker and Rafferty went up looking in the area for him. And as they were doing that, they looked down the block where her house was, and they see the defendant coming out of the house and jumping into our car. So they came down the block. They stopped him. Detective Parker leaned in to talk to him. And I know I worked with him so much. I know exactly what he did because I worked with him for so many years. And the defendant grabbed his gun and he shot both detectives.
Unbelievable.
And there were such great detectives and so heroic. Bobby put over the air that he was shot, Pat was shot, gave him the location, and told him the defendant was in the visor, because the picture was in the visor of the car. And Detective Rafferty, then on the ground dying, pulled out a service revolver and shot the defendant in the ankles. But he was still able to run. He went down the block, and there was a livery van down the block with a man in there. And he put the gun to his head, because now he had Detective Parker's gun, and stole the van. Ordered him out of the van, stole the van. And the van had a huge flag in the back, a Trinidadian flag with a big antenna. And
Easy to find in some way.
yeah, and I was in the station house at the time, and I heard the call come over. Like, so 1013, his officer needs help. And I ran out to the scene. So I was there within moments, and they were on the floor, dying,
Wow.
dead.
Officers who you've worked with on any number of occasions, and
They were friends. I mean, even on our days off, I spoke with Bobby all the time about life and
right.
not.
What's that like to see your?
At the moment, I was so focused on like the crime scene and witnesses, and this has to get solved. And I think I was in shock, but I was so focused on the crime scene, I guess, from all the training that you just kind of switched from personal to business. And then I get a phone call from my sergeant and said, like, this is your case. And I was like, okay, and that was, then the detectives were taken to Kings County Hospital. And the defendant then goes to a friend's house who lived right behind Kings County Hospital.
Wow.
So they found...
And he's got a wound at that point, right?
He has 2 bullet holes, like it went right through his ankle. Like one shot went right through his ankles. It was like a miracle shot. But he goes to somebody's house, and the person then realizes he hears the helicopters. She sees it. She hears the news that something happened. And she throws him out of her house because she's on parole. So also.
Oh, wow.
And she calls the police. So we responded. They responded. He was taken into custody. So you would think like the case is over at that point. We have all this evidence to be, but it wasn't.
Why not?
The defendant went to trial. And you kind of knew he was going to go to trial.
Because he's facing 2 life sentences, or he's 2 murder cases, right?
Yeah. And I kind of knew he was going to try to go to, he was going to go to trial. So it took 2 years to prepare the case for trial, because now you had 3 crime scenes. You had where the detectives were killed. You had down the block where the car was taken. And then you had where he was apprehended. So you had 3 crime scenes. You had 3 different groups of witnesses. You had a slew of things. You had to figure out what the motive was at that point. Because we didn't realize that, the mother with the car, we didn't realize that you're going to kill 2 detectives.
A lot of backstory, right?
Why did he need the car so bad? And we found his girlfriend where he was going to, and we found that whole story with his girlfriend. So it took 2 years to put it all together for trial, and we went to trial. Trial lasted 2 weeks. Everything came out in the trial. The defense tried to make it into something happened in the car,
right?
That led to it. But we won the case.
Convicted.
He was convicted, and he got sentenced to 2 life sentences plus the year for unauthorized use of the vehicle.
I mean, I've worked in the city for 15 years, and so I've been to several cop shot situations where cops were killed and responding to a case. It's always awful. You can kind of get the sense as soon as you get there. Sometimes you can tell the difference between when it's a case where maybe somebody was just dinged in a shootout, but then a situation like that. And so I imagine that was difficult for everyone in that particular precinct and all across the NYPD.
Oh, it was terrible for this. The squad took it really hard. After the defendant was arrested, he went to the hospital. And when he was being released to the hospital, I had in my head that he had to have Detective Rafferty's cuffs on him and be brought back and put in our cell. I felt that it was like a part of honor or justice for the detectives that he was put in the 6-7 cell and brought into the squad room.
Symbolic, yeah, meaningful. Yeah. I imagine it's so difficult for you, but I imagine there's someone who you could rely on or lean on in a situation like that, which was your husband.
No, I wasn't married.
Weren't married at that point?
No.
Oh, okay. So later on, he retired as chief of detectives,
right?
Robert Boyce.
Right.
How did you guys meet? Do you mind if I ask? I know that I know I said we were going to talk about cases, but this is an interesting case.
It's a bizarre story, and it's never. Every time we were someplace and somebody asked us this, I always tell them, like, don't tell a story. 2 babies died, and they were twins, and they died in a crib, and the mother was saying it was a crib death, and it wasn't my case. It was another detective in the squad's case, and I responded to it, and the mother was crying, and the father, and at the time it was Inspector Boyce comes there, and the detective that had the case said it was Sid's, and he looked at me and he said, Detective Leto, what do you think? And I said, the mother killed her. And I went over to being a woman, the first thing I do is go in the kitchen and see what's cooking.
Yeah.
And she had cornmeal cooking on the stove, and at that point the cornmeal was like as thick as cement. And I picked up the bottles, and the bottles had cornmeal in them. So she was feeding the babies cornmeal to make them sleep, to fill them up. But the cornmeal was so thick that it suffocated them.
Wow.
So the detective that had the case didn't want to go to the autopsy because he had children, but I had children also. But I went because I felt that there had to be justice for these babies because of...
Think she was doing it on purpose? Or you think she was...
I don't think she did it on purpose. I don't know, but she did it, if she did it on purpose or not, but she wanted them to sleep. It was 2 twins. She was overwhelmed.
Yeah.
She could have done something differently.
Right. Is she charged? Did she get charged with something in that?
She got charged. She wasn't sentenced, but she was charged.
Because it's so hard. It's so hard. But at least in that sense, Inspector Boyce had a sense, and then you had a sense that something's not right here.
Right.
Interesting.
So that's how we met.
Oh my gosh! And you two still work together on
we still do.
New York Homicide, which is a show that airs on Oxygen True Crime, which really is an insightful show from the perspective of investigators, these detectives. Him, because we talked to him for that series. He told me that when one of the detectives maybe is thinking about whether or not they're going to do it, or they don't know if they want to do it, he usually sends you in and you help convince them that they should do it. I mean, you still have that relationship, or you still can kind of, I mean, how do you...
A lot of them don't want to do it. They feel that either they don't want to relive that part of their life because, when you're dealing with these cases, the families, of course, they're paramount. They're the ones that feel the most pain. They lost their loved ones. It doesn't matter who, the great thing about the New York City Police Department and with most of the police departments, it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a criminal that gets killed or you're, a priest. We handle the case the same way. We realize that whoever that is somebody's child, somebody's loved one. But then when you see the pain on the family's face, and you deal with the families, you deal with the friends, you kind of like, that becomes part of you, and you still feel the pain of that. So I can understand some people don't want to relive that. They're retired now and they're walking on a beach and they just don't want to go back to that part of their life. But we kind of just tell them they have like an obligation because, the show came out of a time when the police department was getting bad raps with George Floyd, and that's not the NYPD. We really, I think we've done more to try to help people in communities than anything. One of the sergeants that worked in the 6-7, he was so upset by a burn victim, a young boy, that every Christmas he would get teddy bears and bring them out to all the kids in the precinct. So there's a very soft spot in these detectives' hearts in the NYPD. So we always tell them it's like an obligation to the family because the family wants to be remembered. Nobody wants to think that their loved one died and nobody cares anymore and they're forgotten.
And I imagine for you, for many of the cases that you worked, that same feeling is still there.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a case once, 2009. A waiter was killed, was stabbed multiple times in his home, and his family, a close-knit family, and the person was convicted. And 15 years later, the case was appealed on the judge's instruction to the jury. It had nothing to do with police work. It had nothing to do with evidence. And at this point, I'm retired, several years. And the DA called up and said, we're thinking about retrying the case. And I was like, absolutely. And she was like, would you come back? And I'm like, absolutely. And I went back, 15 years later and testified again. And he was convicted again. But the family was in the courtroom. And when I walked in, they started crying. And they were like, we didn't think you would come back. And I'm like, of course I would come back. Why wouldn't I?
Very well said. I think that's a great place to end. And New York Homicide, I think you guys have had 3 seasons?
3 seasons, 52 episodes.
Is there going to be another season, maybe?
I hope so.
It's a great show. It's on Oxygen True Crime. You can watch it on demand. But Teresa Leto, thank you so much for making some time for us. It's just amazing to hear your stories, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you.